So, this is a story from several years ago, but I remember it clear as day. A long time ago, I was an addict. 13 years old and lost. I was relying financially and emotionally on much older, 30 to 40-year-old men. It was a mess looking back at it now. It was clear I was being groomed. There was this one guy named Turner. He had 2 kids, aged 3 and 5. They were beautiful little people, and honestly, the only light in my otherwise dark and depressing life. Turner was a crack addict, and fueled me with ounces upon ounces of cocaine, MCAT, and MDMA. I kind of took on the big sister role, and made sure the kids got to school okay and were fed, whilst Turner sat half-conscious on the bedroom floor, usually with a needle or pipe in his hand. Turner let me stay there. I'd stay 7 days a week. My dad had just died, and I essentially had nobody to care about my whereabouts. So that was my life. Constantly high. But I loved those kids. Oh, and their dog too. Tess, the dog, was a Staffy cross pit bull. Vicious as hell. Couldn't be walked because she'd rip the throat out of any passing dog or child. Truly a vicious dog. But she was damaged. So badly abused by all the druggies who came in and out of this house. Approximately 10 people, including myself, lived in this house with the kids and Turner. She would wee herself anytime someone approached her out of pure fear. But for some reason, she loved me. She'd even go for walks at night with me, and behave like a good girl and would snuggle on the sofa with me each night. I never let her around the kids, though. Me and the kids got close, and Turner kind of handed all responsibility over to myself. I didn't mind because, like I said, it gave me something to wake up for each day. I shielded them as much as I could, and when I was being sexually abused, it was often to save one of them from the old perverts that were trying to harm them. It was a shitty situation, but I honestly loved them. I know that sounds like pointless rambling, but it's necessary to understand the story I'm about to tell. One night, Turner and the lads went to another house to take part in a big journey to gather more drugs in time for a rave nearby. Turner left me with a bowl full of cocaine and the kids, so naturally I got high as fuck. I cooked the kids their tea, got them in bed, and walked Tess. I found myself self-harming in the kitchen, feeling completely lost and terrified at what my life had become. I had used a piece of broken glass, and then tossed it into the garden outside. Stupid, I know. I let Tess out for a wee, and heard her yelping, so I ran to her. Her paw was bleeding. It was really bad. I realized she'd stood on the glass I threw out of the window, and I burst into tears, scooped Tess up, and ran to the bathroom. The bathroom was massive. Next door, beside the bedroom, was yet another bathroom. I lay in the bath with Tess on my lap and sprayed her paw with water, trying to see if the glass was still there. I lay in the bath for a good half hour crying and apologizing to the dog like some crazy woman. Tess seemed to relax, and I got a bandage and wrapped her paw before calling Turner, saying she'd need to go to the vet. He refused, of course. I then heard the girl, the oldest child, talking in her bedroom. I went to the door and could hear very faint chatter. I assumed that she was just playing pretend or whatever kids do, and I walked away. Tess was now walking, well, limping, but wouldn't budge from the kids' door. I tried pulling her away, but she just stood growling at the door. I couldn't get into the kids' room for fear of Tess running in and attacking. I tried to bait the dog away with treats, but to no avail. But then I heard it. A man's voice, clear as anything. I couldn't make out the words, but it was definitely not a child's voice. I realized now why Tess was being so defensive. I picked her up and locked her in the big bathroom we were just in. Then I went back to the kids' door with no real clue as to what I was going to do. I swung the door open, but the room was empty besides the kids. The girl was sat at the end of the bed. I asked who she had been talking to, and she just said, "That man." I asked which man, and she pointed to the slightly open bathroom door. I told her to lie back in bed and relax, and slowly made my way to the door. As I did, the door swung open, and there he was, all 6 foot plus of him, a huge guy with a beard and crazed eyes. I don't know why, but I pushed him by his chest further into the bathroom, and then turned to run towards the kids. The girl was looking at me shocked. As I ran towards them, he grabbed me from behind and got me in a chokehold of sorts, and told me not to move. I had been sexually assaulted, beaten and branded by these men, but for some reason, this time, I feared for my life more than ever before. I noticed a knife in his left hand, raised in next to my side. He told the kids to lock themselves in the large wardrobe in the living room. As I said, lots of people lived here, many of which slept in the living room as it was huge, and they did. I told them it would be okay, but the truth was it wasn't. He sat me on the sofa and began to draw the knife across my skin, almost playfully. I was too scared to speak. At this point, my friend walked in. Another young girl, around 18 years old. She stayed here too, sometimes. The way the house was laid out meant that as soon as she entered, she could see me sat on the sofa but not the man. I tried with my eyes to show her that something was wrong, but she confidently walked in. The man was startled by her entry, as was she by him. He told her to sit on the sofa, but she was a feisty one. She ran at him, assuming he was just some druggy idiot, screaming at him to get out or so-and-so would kick his head in. Before she finished her sentence, he punched her square in the jaw, her falling to the floor. I jumped out of reflex, and he stabbed me in the side of my left arm. Then he said, "You sit the fuck back down, or I'll do the same to you." When she tried to sit back up, he kicked her in the face and continued beating her. He was slapping, punching, biting. He even ripped her earrings out, tearing her lobes. By a few minutes in, she was unconscious, and I sat there like a fucking coward. Once unconscious, he threw her to the side like she weighed nothing and looked back at me. He took both of my hands and tied them together with duct tape and told me to shut the fuck up. And then he started to approach the wardrobe the kids were in. I started to scream at them to run, but as soon as it was open, he had them. They were kicking and screaming, and he threw the boy onto the floor, causing him to hit his head. He then went into the bedroom with the girl, telling me to stay with the boy and not dare try anything, or he'd make that cut deeper. I felt helpless, and I did the only thing I could think to do. I ran into the big bathroom and let Tess free. I pushed the bedroom door open and watched as Tess jumped on this man, ripping him to fucking pieces. He was stabbing Tess and the girl was crying, but Tess just kept going. I ran in and got the girl, then got the boy and pushed them out the front door. They lived deep in the country, good for growing weed and selling drugs, and so I told them to hide behind the huge van on the field. I went back in, and it was like a horror movie. Blood up the walls, flesh on the floor. It was amazingly horrific. Tess was still mauling this man, and he'd given up fighting. His lower leg was shredded to meat. I grabbed Tess and dragged her off. She had tired herself out, and had less power at that point. The man was unconscious. I took Tess out of the room and saw she'd been stabbed at least 6 times, mainly across her back. As the adrenaline wore off, she got weaker. I held her in my arms as she died, and I've never cried that much before or since. I remember telling her, "You're a good girl, Tess. I'm sorry they made you bad. I'm sorry they hurt you. I love you." And I really did. Tess and those kids gave me purpose. I held her for a while and watched her take her last breaths. I put her in the bath, covered her in blankets, and went for the kids. As I left the house, Turner had arrived back with the lads and they looked at me, covered in blood, looking like a murderer, and looked at the kids. Turner came running at me asking what I'd done, probably assuming I'd had a huge trip and hurt someone. I couldn't talk and I just carried the kids out and hugged them. He went into the house and saw what had happened. He saw the guy and instantly began screaming. Turns out that guy was the kid's mother's ex-boyfriend, arrested for sexually assaulting and abusing the kids and mother. He'd come back to seemingly kill them, probably Turner too, and hurt them one last time. The kids got later taken into care, and the boy died a few years later in a car accident, while Turner took him away. Was allowed contact every 2 weeks, supervised. He drove high and killed the boy, severely injured the carer and himself. That was what it took for me to finally get clean. I wish it hadn't. But then, maybe if it was clean, I wouldn't have been there for those kids. I don't know. I carry an insane amount of guilt always. I attempted suicide 6 months later, but then I decided that I was selfish. I had to use my experience to help others. So I went to school. I volunteered and now work in a mental health unit, specializing in those with substance abuse issues. It'll never fix it, bring the boy or Tess back, but maybe it'll save someone else. I guess I just wanted to tell the story. I never have before, not to anyone other than the police and social services. As awful as it was, what adds to my guilt is that for that reason, because that happened, I was finally saved. Social workers realized I was unaccounted for, uncared for, and neglected. They took me into rehab straight away and helped me get clean. I got fostered by an amazing woman who unfortunately died last year. That horrific, violent incident saved my life. I just wish it had theirs, too. I can't say his name, but rest in peace, boy. Tess, Dad, and Julie. You're the reason I'm a better person now, so thank you. Thank you for reading, and I hope it didn't darken your day too much. Hi there. Long-time lurker and got plenty of stories to share. This one makes my skin crawl, and my whole insides cringe just thinking about it. Here's some of the backstory. I grew up in a small town in New Zealand, and had recently moved to a big city for university. The town I grew up in was a really rough and gang-oriented place, so I was always somewhat weary of strangers. However, I didn't really give much thought to little old white men in mobility scooters. Living in a big city was awesome, because I got to go shopping in malls and Kmart. Kmart in New Zealand is probably the equivalent of Walmart in the US, but us Kiwis seem to love it a lot. Anyway, one day I was shopping at Kmart, looking at the dog beds which were at the back aisle of the store. Kmart is huge, and the back aisle is the entire length of the store. I get this feeling suddenly that I'm being watched, and turn to see an old man in a mobility scooter at the opposite end, staring directly at me. I give him a small smile, and turn back to browsing, when in my peripheral vision I see him racing towards me in his scooter at great speed. I immediately assumed that his urgency must mean he needs help reaching for something, or finding something else, so I turned to face him. He was a harmless old man, right? Wrong. He quickly starts chatting to me and sharing personal things with me without actually greeting me. He starts telling me how I look like his wife who passed when she was younger. He then starts telling me how lonely he is, and I start to feel a bit of pity for him. Then the conversation starts taking a weird turn. He starts telling me how he likes to dress up and feel sexy in women's clothing. Then he starts to open his mouth and show me all of his missing teeth and gums. The sudden turn of conversation startles me. This sudden turn of conversation startles me, and I start to realize that I need to end this and leave him immediately. After several attempts at saying goodbye, he finally agrees to let me go and holds out his hand for a goodbye handshake. Desperate to leave, I agree to shake his hand in order for him to leave me alone. Suddenly his grip tightens, and I can't pull my hand away. He forces my hand towards his mouth and begins to make out with the back of my hand while swishing his tongue across it in circles. I aggressively pull my hand away and sprint out of the store in shock. The air from running makes the back of my hand feel cold and slimy, so I run to the mall toilets and scrub my hand for a solid 10 minutes, vowing to never let him talk to me again. I thought I'd never see him again, until just recently I did. I was on the bus to uni when he gets on without his mobility scooter and a walking stick instead. Thankfully, I had someone already sitting next to me, so I felt pretty safe. However, his eyes scanned the bus, and when they met mine, he immediately smiled. So when the bus got to the interchange where everyone gets off and gets onto other buses, I quickly rushed off the bus so I wouldn't have to see him. I felt my stomach hit the floor when I hear him start calling out for me. I glance over my shoulder to see him waving his walking stick, yelling and pursuing after me. I quickly rush out into a shopping store to lose him, which is a success. The rest of the day goes fine, until I go to return home and see that he's waiting at the stop I board my bus at. I hide until I can see my bus coming. He's looking around a bit and starts to wander away from the bus stop after a while, which is my cue to quickly board. I jump in line and get on board quickly. However, he spotted me and is waving his stick and yelling at me again. I start to panic, as I don't want to be trapped in the bus with him. He's just about to step on the bus when the driver all of a sudden slams the doors on him. This makes him furious, and he starts smashing his walking stick against the window and shouting. I look at the driver, who smiles at me, gives me a nod, and starts to pull away onto the road. I'm overjoyed that this kind driver literally saved me from this creepy old man. So I step up to the window he's hitting and stare directly at him with the filthiest look I can give while the bus slowly drives away. I literally felt like I got my power back. I later found out that this old man is a well-known creep in the community, which makes me grateful that the bus driver saved me that day. So lesson for everyone. Don't let your kindness keep you trapped in a situation that's dangerous. If someone is giving you the creeps, it's for a good reason. I'm a 27-year-old female. At the time this occurred, I was a senior in high school, angsty and steadily into partying. For this story, I'm going to hide her identity, solely due to the rules on Reddit. Let's call her Kay. Kay almost cost me my life, and I never want to see her again. A little backstory on her. She had grown up quite privileged, given anything she ever wanted. Her parents adopted her 5 cousins, and this is when she started to rebel. Her parents, well off, started to pay less attention to her, so Kay had all the freedom in the world. At the time this incident occurred, Kay was 18, and I had just turned 18 as well. We were headed to a kickback at these guys' house, and nothing more than a little bit of weed was expected. Now, I had my share of smoking weed, popping pills here and there. I had just tried ecstasy the summer prior. However, I was planning on staying sober. Shia picked me up, and we wanted to buy cigs at a gas station. I bought a fountain drink, one with a straw and everything. This is crucial for later in the story. We arrive at the apartment, and everyone is smoking, including Kay, but I declined. She would always say shit about how she never wanted to be high alone, complained about how I never got as high as she did, So I obliged and I cleared the bong off her hit, not even taking a full hit. She asked for a drink of my soda and I handed it to her. She had it for a good minute. I had my head turned, talking to someone at the kickback. When I looked back at Kay, she was messing with my straw. I didn't think much of it, and she handed it back to me right away. Within about 30 minutes or so, though, I started to feel intensely high, to the point that I needed to escape from the group. I'd go out front to smoke a cigarette, only to find that I couldn't even stand up, so I laid on the front porch. Then all of these dark thoughts flashed through my mind. I felt so sick, like my stomach was being torn open. I couldn't stand back up. I had to crawl to the bushes to throw up. I thought to myself, all of this just from clearing a bong? So I laid back on the porch. The apartment was located on a busy street in the city I live in. I thought about running into traffic just because I felt so much like I was dying. So I gave myself two options. I could run into traffic, have a car hit me and end this horrible pain I was in, or I could get some help, maybe flag someone down. Obviously, my mind wasn't in the right state. I knew nobody at the kickback would take me seriously, and I knew something was terribly wrong. I thought about calling my mom. I must have dialed her number and hung up about 5 different times. Finally, I called and told her what had happened, and that I didn't know why I was so high. Nobody else was feeling the way I felt. What seemed like an eternity later, Kay finally came outside looking for me. As I'm puking my guts out in the bushes, she asked me if I want to go get some food. I asked her if she was being fucking serious. She laughed at me as I puked. What I didn't know was that my mother had called my older brother to pick me up, since he lived close to where I was. He showed up with a machete, ran inside and threatened people. He didn't know who gave me what. It wasn't until I got home that my brother took one look at my eyes and noticed how dilated my pupils were, so they rushed me to the ER after more puking, of course. My memory there is a bit fuzzy. I just remember asking my sister-in-law if I was going to die and telling her that I was scared. They ended up having to sedate me, due to the fact that I was yelling and threatening the nurses. Totally out of character for me. They did a tox screen and found MDMA, along with other drugs in my system. I'm assuming the other drugs were the ones used to make up the ecstasy. Now, all of this is frightening to me and everything. However, what I found out a few days later shocked me to my core. Kay had been to a house party the next night. Somebody there had said she was passing out free ecstasy to 4 different people. Of those 4 people, 3 had grand mal seizures and had to be taken to the ER by ambulance. I'm assuming whatever ecstasy she had used was a bad batch. Remember when she asked to have a drink of my soda? I assume this is when she dropped a pill inside and it dissolved. She probably crushed it beforehand or something. I have no clue, but at this time in my life I hadn't done drugs for quite a while, especially not ecstasy. Kay also went on to tell people that I was the one who slipped her the drug, and she had to go to the hospital. She's a pathological liar, and has had to go to therapy for a long time for mental disorders. All of this happened just because she wanted me to be high like her. I could have committed suicide because I wasn't in the right frame of mind. It still affects me to this day. It sounds cliché, but I have a hard time trusting people with this experience and among other things. I also don't like sharing drinks with anybody. I get scared when I go to a bar or club, fearing for the worst. I mean, if my own friend could do this to me, what's stopping a stranger? So I always guard my drink now, no matter what.